Hey everybody, my name's Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, I just want to get the promotional stuff out of the way. If you haven't seen the previous episode, which are all about the Ranma 1/2 remake over on Netflix, definitely give that a look. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it wherever you're listening to it, or if you're watching this over on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below along with the bell so when new episodes are released. And if you want, tons more that I'm trying to keep updated, I swear, go on over to the show's website, which will be in multiple descriptions. It will be in the description of this episode. It is in the description of both the YouTube channel and the podcast proper. And that website is bento-box.io. And you can go there, you can find posts for different episodes, although I need to update it with the last episode and some articles I've written. I really need to get around to finishing the current article I'm writing. I've been saying that for months, but it is the holiday season where I am, and there's just a lot to do. So definitely go check that stuff out. As always, I'm going to encourage you to go check out the artist interviews I've done in the past couple months. I'm probably not going to end up doing one this month, but in place of that, I have a video that, if you're watching this in your regular view on YouTube, or you're listening to this, you've probably already seen or heard this video, and it's all about the AI dub nonsense that occurred with not just anime, but the big blow-up online that I saw, because of what I'm talking about and what I'm into, was about anime, especially because they tried to do it with Banana Fish, which is insane. But you can go check out that video. And on that note, let's jump into the plot description of what we'll be talking about today. And that is, I'm going to try and do this justice. It's a long one, kids. It is Add an Assassin. I think it's the Assassin show. I'm probably going to bungle this. But it's Add an Assassin. My skills clearly outranks the hero. So I'm not going to try to say that 10 times fast. But I am going to throw it over to I for a plot synopsis. So take it away, I.
Oda Akira is the kind of guy who people forget is even there. His unassuming nature pays off, though, when his entire class is swept away to a fantasy world, and he slips easily into his new role as a silent assassin. Between his suspiciously high starting stats and too many details that don't fit, Akira is sure something is wrong. But digging into royal secrets is a dangerous game, and when Akira uncovers an evil scheme, he also makes a powerful enemy, the very king who brought him to this world. With the help of the elven spirit medium Amelia, can he find the power to set things right and get his revenge?
Now that the plot synopsis is out of the way, I want to start here with something odd for this show, because I'm not talking about the show because I think it's groundbreaking necessarily, or I think it's doing something new for the isekai genre. It's a pretty standard power fantasy, but the thing that struck me as really interesting about the show, is that it's got beautiful production qualities on a certain level. The characters look like they're out of an old school 90s fantasy anime. A little bit in the same vein as something like Frieren, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Frieren was responsible for this kind of look, because the way this show looks, it feels like something old, like Record of Lotus War is old, like something that came out when I was in middle school to high school, or really probably even elementary school, because Record of Lotus War, I believe, was from the mid to early 90s. Don't quote me on that, though. But it has this really angular, elongated, very, pre-Inuyasha fantasy vibes to it that lots of shows don't really get. But then you look at the content of the show, and it's like every other isekai. It's like every other power fantasy. It's a little bit more edgelordy because of what they chose to do with the main character, but it's bog standard. It also has a problem that lots of these shows now have, in that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of justification for what's happening plot-wise. The main character falls in love with the main female love interest, and you super see why. And the show goes through all the motions, but there's not a whole lot of weight, at least for me, behind the show, because you watch enough of these and you know what you're watching. But the other thing is you watch enough of these and you know what a good one looks like, and a bad one looks like, and you know what a just okay one looks like. But the interesting thing here is that the production quality and the character design and the coloration and even to some extent the animation all feels like a higher tier than you get for a lot of these kinds of shows. I want to talk about a better version of the, isekai stuck in a fantasy world thing here for a second. And that better version is a show called... what's it called now? It's gonna drive me nuts. Oh, fuck. Now, before we get into the meat of what I want to say about the show, I want to first examine the kind of life cycle of a anime consumer, if you will. And I'm doing this for a reason. Last I checked, and this could have changed since a lot of things about anime fandom, especially in America, where I'm from, has changed, especially since the pandemic and over the past decade, is that most American anime fans, at least, are what you would describe as hardcore fans for around 2 years. And most productions, especially of anything anime, not just anime, take much longer than that. So they're predicting what will be popular by what's popular now, and the people who are primary consumers of the medium are switching out much faster than that whole cycle takes. And so we've been living in isekai land for a long time. A lot of what comes out is still isekai. It's starting to shift more towards straight fantasy, things like Freyren and others, but it's also starting to... Isekais are starting to take on more specific and niche focuses. You saw this for a long time with moe anime, when the big moe boom happened in the early aughts. Is that eventually the kind of moe shows, and that's moe is little, I must protect her characters, lots of times I must protect her female character, really started to get into very specific subgenres of itself and very focused subgenres of itself. I keep coming back on the show to Genshiken, partly for this reason, is that it is a great time capsule of what anime fandom and hardcore dedicate your life to it anime fandom was in the early aughts, late 90s. And that show, TGBK Unbalanced, that is a fake show, I think they actually made a 3-episode OVA, at the very least, of that show and put it out into the world. But in the universe of Genshiken, it is the show that they're all watching. That really captured what the moe boom looked like at that point. It was getting into this very odd place. An example of this is Baka and Test, is a show from that time period. And then, as you came out of it, you got more things that were less like that. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, because I'm keeping an example purposely in there for something else, which we'll get to in a second. But the long and short of it is that the popularity cycle and what gets made is much different, that it is defined in a much different way now than it even was then, but then had a lot of the same momentum misalignments and judgment of what's going to be popular in 5 years misalignments, and so trends in anime tend to stretch out longer, in my experience, because the churn of the fandom is significantly shorter than the actual production of the media, so to speak. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you watched a show, I'm going to call it Assassins for short, because I already butchered the title in the opening. But you watch Assassins, and you see a bog standard isekai. If you've seen maybe 2 isekai shows, you've seen this show. It takes a little bit of a different approach to it, but there's nothing... It's not that you see stuff coming, it's that nothing that happens really surprises you in the show. But what should surprise you, and what surprised me, is the production, not even quality, but style of the show. This show looks different than a lot of other isekais. And if you've seen enough isekais, it's kind of the look I'm talking about. It's a very bog standard, kind of generic anime of right now. It looks like Sword Art Online. It looks like In Another World with My Smartphone. It looks like My Unlimited Cheat Power. They all kind of blend together, and as far as I can tell, as really old school, like old taku, those things exist to become hilarious abridged series months later, at the very least. As one of my favorite abridged series I've never seen the entirety of is the In Another World with My Smartphone abridged, which the first couple episodes you can find them crammed together here on YouTube or on YouTube. The kind of vagueness of those shows allows for a level of joke making that is, for a frequency of jokes in those abridged series that is hysterical. With pretty minimal cutting and rearranging, or pretty minimal clear cutting and rearranging. If you watch Jujutsu Kaisen abridged, that iteration of that show uses a lot of cutting and uses a lot of cutting of the video tricks to facilitate the sheer amount of jokes it has. The Shield Hero, In Another World with My whatever shows don't need that much because they're all the same. Down to the point where they all look the same. Everything has a vaguely European fantasy vibe. And once again, you can watch any of these shows and you'll see what I'm talking about. Probably one of the best isekai I saw that Assassins also borrows from liberally is a show called The Executioner and Her Life and Times. And the interesting thing about that show, I did an audio-only podcast on my old feed about it. I might actually cover it here because I think it's a really good show. The interesting thing about this show is it deals with the idea of what happens when you keep bringing people, not when you bring just one person back, but when you've been bringing people from another reality into your reality. It's candy, basically. Like, it's candy out of a gumball machine. There's very few things stopping it, and what a fantasy world starts to look like when that happens, and what the consequences are, and what the controls end up being. And the reason why it's called The Executioner in Life and Times is the main character's job is to find these summoned people and kill them. Because it's causing problems in the world that just a kid who knows what trains and cameras are showing up in this medieval fantasy setting. And throughout the show, they show you things that other people summoned into this world have done. They encounter a town with just a full train system, and they encounter another town where it's electrified in a way that none of the other towns are, and it's like, what's happening here? And the thing with Assassins, thinking about it, is that it's borrowing from all over the isekai thing, which is not uncommon for any kind of media. And I've said this phrase on plenty of occasions on the show, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And that goes to not just the things I've mentioned previously about that phrase, but the idea that we're all being influenced, and anybody who's creating is creating under an influence. The person who originally writes Sword Art Online, he actually addressed a fault of his that he used as a crutch commonly, and that was putting female characters in specifically sexually explicit danger. And he said in an interview, he's like, I need to stop doing this. I see now what other people have seen for a long time, and I need to correct for that, because it's really gross that I keep doing this to these characters when there's no reason for it. And eventually, in Sword Art Online Alicization, Kirito is fully out of the picture. He swings the pendulum of that universe completely in the other direction in a way that I think is pretty neat and interesting, even if I don't have interest in watching it. Because he just looks into the camera and he said, "Oh, you thought he was the cool one." He is the loner weirdo that I've been hinting at since the online movie, where they all do it in the real world for the entire movie. But they play the game as like AR, XR experience in the real world for an entire movie, which is an interesting movie. I think it's called Sword Art Online Alicization, like the movie. But the long and short of it there is, I talked about this a lot actually, in my Togen Anki review, which you should totally go watch, because I ripped that thing for shreds, I think, appropriately. But when you borrow from things and don't correct for stuff in the process, you can end up taking stuff you didn't intend to. If you look at, and the reason why I brought up Togen Anki is, if you look at that show, it takes a lot of stuff from shows like Bleach. It is basically much amalgamation of its genre, but it missed the point in some key ways, the most glaring of which is its treatment of female characters. There's not a female character that isn't smuggling watermelons and in increasingly less fabric, which to smuggle those watermelons. And the way the camera treats those characters is also beyond the pale, in a show that has no business or no reason to do that with its characters. So you're left with a show that you can't ignore that quality of it, and you almost don't know what to do with it. It's really weird. But the other thing about doing that is, if you've been around for long enough, if you've seen enough stuff, you recognize the kinds of things that the show is calling back to. And it's not that you're not necessarily surprised by the way things go, but nothing that happens is something that you didn't expect to happen. It's not like you can, I'm not saying I watched Assassins and I knew where it was going at every point, but when it did it didn't feel like a twist. It felt like, oh, we're using that right now? Oh, cool. And the thing that really surprised me about the show is the production quality feels less like an every other isekai, in another world with my smartphone, Shield Hero look and feel of these shows. If you want a good idea of a proper send-up of that, is you can look at Konosuba. Konosuba is using all of the building blocks of isekai to just have a fun, hilarious time with it, and go full comedy in a way that no other isekai really does. Other isekais have jokes, they have attempts and gestures in the direction of comedy, but it doesn't land, because the thing about these shows is they're so self-serious because they end up being wish fulfillment shows. That is true of Assassins, absolutely. The main character is totally a wish fulfillment character. He's totally what they call like Gary Sue, edgelord, right up there with Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul, which is a show that I famously, in a previous podcast, and I've probably talked about it here too, called a tone poem. It's not so much a show as it is a dedication to a vibe of teenage Hot Topic-esque edginess, which I think when you look at the anime that was produced from that manga, which is the manga I still regard as the same thing, just better and more interestingly executed, but not much. If you look at that show that way, and if you look at this show that way, it all starts to fit together a little bit better, because it separates this show from all the other isekai out there. Because once again, if you've seen any isekai, you've seen this show, you just don't know it yet. And when I say this, I don't mean quality as in high quality or low quality, but the production quality of it. this show looks a lot older than it is. And I was talking to a friend in my D&D group, and he was, what are you doing tonight? I'm like, I'm watching a show that perplexes me. And he's like, what do you mean? Because it's not terrible, but it's not great. But it has this oomph to the character design and the visuals of it that are way better than it is. The character of the main character and entire main cast, which is extensive, even the supporting character, is really pretty good. Because it feels like an old school fantasy anime in the way that Frieren can. But the thing about Frieren, and the thing that makes Frieren really exceptional, is Frieren fully does not care about the typical let's go defeat the demon lords thing. Because that's already happened. That's not the concern anymore. The thing that's cool about Frieren is doing for fantasy anime at an endgame level what is starting to happen with the better isekai. The Executioner and the Life and Time. Which is, it's going beyond the initial premise of the genre and saying, like, we all know what a Demon King is. We all know the song and dance. Let's get past that and let's look at what happens after for the character who is going to live for 1,000 years at least, for thousands of years. What does that mean for her? What does that specific 10-year span that's a very small fraction of her life mean for her, and how does it affect her going forward? Does it mean everything? Who knows? But this show doesn't. It has the design efforts and the art efforts and the even framing efforts, and even down to the opening sequence. It's very much set up like an old school fantasy anime, or even an old school original recipe isekai. Something like Geflone is actually a perfect example for this, because the captain character in the beginning, and I remember nobody's name. This should tell you something. I remember nobody's name in this show. The captain character, who, spoiler alert, dies in the very beginning of the show, feels like a character from Escaflowne. It used to be that, and if you're watching the show and you haven't seen that stuff, you don't have that mental library, I can understand that you wouldn't see it. And is this the worst isekai ever made? Not by a long shot. It's solidly in the middle. But it's not doing enough with the parts it's pulling, at least so far, to get to something that feels like the level of art and aesthetic that it's playing with. So you have these beautiful character design and this interesting stuff, and then they go to a beauty pageant for an episode. Or they do a poorly constructed romance between the main character and the leading supporting female character that feels so edgelordy that he literally makes a wedding ring by cutting his own finger on the ring finger all the way around, just below the first knuckle. It's wild. One of the few things that it does that I think is interesting and I hope goes somewhere is that the main character and all the other characters are concerned with going home, which until recently had not been a real thing that isekai has been interested in, because it's supposed to be about escaping. It's supposed to be a total escapist fantasy, and the idea that your life sucks. All of a sudden, you get hit by a bus and you shoot to another universe. And I'm gonna reference one of my favorite things to reference when I'm talking about isekai here, which is Which is Jobless Reincarnation, because Jobless Reincarnation, the way it handles that idea is, okay, great, you had a terrible life. The world beat you into a corner, essentially. The world beat you into a corner in a way that the only way you were ever going to come out was a malformed antisocial scumbag. Which is what Rudius was before he was literally actually reborn as you see him in the show. In the show, and he is very clear to be like, that's not me anymore. I have those memories. I lived that life. That life was awful. I need to work to make sure I don't become that ever again. And by the point at which we're in the anime, he's already well on that path, and it's a much more straight fantasy show than a like isekai thing where they're worried about getting back. And later on in the light novel, Hoshi literally, and if you've noticed, I remember all of their names, is like, hey, don't you want to go back? And he's like, no, I don't. I didn't like me back when I was that. You wouldn't like me when I was that. Clearly, we came here in two totally different ways. I'm the person I want to be here. I get that you want to go back. I don't. Fully just don't. And the thing about that is that show has a really complex relationship with the idea of if it's possible to go back to your old life, would you? They have a character who, that is her whole driving force, that's Nanahoshi. And they have a character who understands, no, I've made myself into a better person in a way that I don't back into what I was, if that's even possible. And he recognizes that he was a scumbag. And in many ways, in that show, it's still a scumbag, but he does it and recognizes it when it's happening. But this is the first isekai I've seen it or heard of in a while that is concerned with, well, how do we get the hell back to our lives? And they all have an idea of how to do that and why to do, and a path forward with that. But the show is not so subtly hinting at the fact that that's the path they're taking to get that done, which is the standard go defeat the Demon Lord path, isn't the goal. And if I had to say that there's an interesting thing here that they could do with that, I think that might be it. I don't have a whole lot of confidence that will be it, or that they'll fall through on that, because once again, this feels like a collage of a lot of other isekai stuff put together, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, or that can't be great. I am saying that it's not pulling it off so far in a way that gives me confidence that it will stick the landing, so to speak. And the look and feel of this show makes it feel disjointed in a way that, when paired with the story, starts to make no sense. Now, a lot of you might be wondering, well, Alex, if you don't like the show, why are you talking about it on your show? Well, I think it's doing something good, something excellent, actually, for the genre of isekai, for the isekai genre. And that is that it's bringing up the execution level on the art level that equals something to be in the realm of something like Record of Lotus Ward, to be in the realm of something like Escaflowne. These incredible, now very old, decades old, fantasy anime that are what isekai is trying to get you to, but it's also trying to add in a wish fulfillment angle of it, where I think at this point, something like this show, for example, something like Assassin, would be much more successful if they offered real challenge that doesn't immediately get overcome. And that's actually where I'm gonna leave it. So if you...
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern Time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you like the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.